word for the moment. So good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Janice Dempsey and this ethereal person next to me is Dónall Dempsey, and we're the editors of Peter Roberts' fine first pamphlet, Night Owling. Tonight we'll be hosting a celebration of its publication this month. Peter's invited two guest poets to read alongside him, Wright and Gracie. Peter will read first, then Annie will read some of her poems. Peter will read a second set, followed by poems from Charlie, then a third set from Peter. And after that, we'll have time for an informal Q&A when you can ask or comment or otherwise interact with all three poets. Perhaps you would like to type any questions that occur to you in the chat box on your screen, and I will pick them up for you to ask at the end of the readings. But if you just want to be spontaneous at the end, that's all right too. I'm sure everyone here is Zoom efficient after the last 2 years. I've asked you to mute your microphones while the readings are going on, and I think everybody's done that. Now, I think most of you know Peter very well, but he's provided me with some facts about himself as a poet that were news to me, as well as and might be new to some of you too. Peter spent his childhood in North Lancashire and his working life in the northeast of England. He had short spells as a community arts worker and as a member of a workers' cooperative running a whole food shop. But mostly his career was spent writing dull public sector policy, attempting to craft words as if they were jewels in the desert. I'm sure that might have done his poetry some good. He is a keen and award-winning photographer, and he was a founder member of Darlington Media Workshop, providing open access, darkrooms, and print media facilities for community work use. In fact, the photograph behind me tonight is the front of his book, and it's a photograph by Peter himself. I love it. Peter's life was not entirely, I'm sorry, I'm moving ahead too fast. Peter moved to southwest Scotland in 2012. And in 2015, he had a lead role in winning a Creative Place Award from Creative Scotland for his home community of Moniav. His partner, Annie Wright, an established poet, started the Moniav Poetry Workshop in 2016 as part of the 3-year arts programme founded by the Creative Place Award. Desperate to ensure its success and the wider success of the programme, Peter put aside his resistance to poetry. It was Annie's thing, and he didn't want to be cast in the role of a poetry groupie, but he joined the workshop. He soon found that a bug had bitten him very deeply, and he progressed from his early output of doggerel to winning the Dumfries and Galloway Fresh Voice Award at the Wigtown Poetry Competition in 2020. The award gave him both professional monitoring and writing retreat time to develop his award submission into the now published collection, Night Owling. Peter's life was not entirely without poetry before 2016. He remembers taking his daughter on a day trip to Dublin in the mid-1990s. Above his head on the carriage wall of the Dart train from Dunleary to Dublin was Derek Mahon's short poem, Nostalgias. He was so taken with it, he went straight to a bookshop in Grafton Street and bought Mahon's selected poems. It was the poetry candle that kept burning until 2016, and Mahon, along with several other poets now, has continued to be a significant influence. Poems on trains. Ireland was doing it a long time before London Underground. After 21 years together, Peter and Annie were married in November 2021, in the middle of Storm Arwen. And I think we've heard hints from the guests so far that it was also in the middle of a power cut. So love this. I love this this book, and I'm looking forward to hearing readings from Peter starting now. Peter, would you like to unmute?
You got to unmute.
Off you go,
Peter.
unmute, Peter. Peter Roberts.
There we are. Thank you. Oh, the technicalities. I used to hate that at work, you know, trial by technology. But anyway, I don't think after that introduction, that rousing introduction, I don't think I need to say anything else about myself, other than to say that at 69, I'm still very bemused to be thought of as a fresh voice. As you said, Night Owling is my first collection. It's a sort of accretion of poems written since I started with the Money Hive group in 2015. I'll say a bit more about how the collection came together when I introduced the first poem, because that poem was sort of instrumental in getting this publication together. This is the set that was submitted for the Fresh Voice Award. And the award allowed me to work with, I thought he would be here tonight, but he's not, allowed me to work with the Scottish poet Kenneth Stephen as my professional mentor to improve the set for publication. I'll just quickly read what it says on the back of the book, because that tells you something about what's in it. It's an insomniac's exploration. I know something about insomnia. An insomniac's exploration of the emotional archaeology of family and early experience, of some of the characters who peopled my childhood, of a life shaped by the hill country of the north. I better say the north of England, sitting here in Scotland, and of ways of seeing the evoking power of decaying human landscapes, traits of masculinity, which is something I'm increasingly interested in for my future writing. Initially, the set was just a collection, a file of poems, but it really started to take shape when I wrote the title poem, Night Owling. And that's where I'm going to start. A really important poem for me in that it really gave me confidence, more so than winning the Fresh Voice Award. It gave me confidence in myself as a writer, as a poet. For the first time, I just let the poem emerge rather than trying to force something out with in a kind of intellectual exercise. This came out of a workshop exercise that brought together in my mind insomnia, which, as I say, I know a lot about. Allen Ginsberg's great beat poem, Howl, which I knew nothing about other than the name by word, coming to me by word association. And also this painting, Nighthawks by Edward Hopper, which is on the cover of the book. And the poem came out of putting all these three things together. Night Owling, after Allen Ginsberg and Edward Hopper. And wake sometime after 1, get up to take a leak, come back to keep the beat with every toss and turn, the night owl taunting with its high fluting hooting, a bass alto riff that goes on and on, like Lester Young in Kansas in 1938, saxing the crowd to madness with 72 choruses of The Man I Love, and worry about Moloch's latest incarnation, creeping into my brain along Wi-Fi waves, the clock going too slow to an ending, too fast for hopes of sleep, and long to shout down the ghost howl of the insomniac and leave, hunting like a nighthawk through dark frosted streets to that pool of light in the lonely night, order coffee and corn dogs, share the company of strangers in meaningless talk about the bears and the black hawks, anything so as to seem alive and not lost, and wonder why last night I dreamed of Chicago. There'll be a few references in there to the Lester Young episode and Moloch, even the Bears and the Blackhawks that you might want to know more about. If you do, just ask questions at the end. I'm going to move on. Second poem is the second poem in the book. That's nice and logical, isn't it? It's called Walls. And this poem introduces a theme that is quite important to, and runs through several of the poems in the book, about how early experience, the things we experience as children, can become embedded in us as beliefs about ourselves and the world that can control our lives unless we learn how to control them. The poem was written on a train journey from Carlisle to Newcastle through the Roman war country. Walls. The carriage is full, each passenger like me hauling their life's baggage, the man drinking whiskey in the morning, boys gambling noisily, the couple rigid with avoidance of each other, me as ever traveling alone, our stories like spells conjuring our paths. We skirt the edge of debatable lands, climb into 2,000 years of history, heaving beneath a green skin, poking, scratching, breaking through to reveal only the skeletal remains of old beliefs and their martial consequences. And, stilled by motion, I feel again the clawing of my own history freighted in my chest, the iron weight dragging at heart and lungs, the burden of flesh built up to wall the past, incarcerate hurts that will not be silenced. Where the track cuts the corner of a Roman fort, like a release of trapped time, the train's struggle eases and lets go into a freewheeling flight towards the distant city, into the present. I refer there to debatable lands. That's both historical fact and a metaphor in this poem for sort of our inner lives. And again, the historical debatable land is a very interesting thing to talk about. And if anyone wants to know more, we can talk about that at the end. I think it's always a good idea to plant the questions you want to answer rather than be caught out. Anyway, let's turn now to, there's a sequence of 4 sonnets in the book, collectively titled Lost Northern Souls. And I've put as a subtitle under that 2 lines from Jackie Leven's song, Classic Northern Diversions. In every heart, in every home, there's a dying man who lives alone. Jackie, I was obsessed with Jackie Leven. He died in 2011. I think it's the last time I had a really good cry. A lot of his songs were about the hidden, suppressed, mutilated lives of men, particularly hard working class men. And I started thinking about people who wandered through my childhood, people that I knew nothing at all about their lives. But these sonnets are intended to honor the lives of men who seem to live on the margins. I've only got time to read one of them. So I'm going to read The Sheep Man. I think 1 or 2 of you will have heard this, so apologies for that. But Dad took me with him once to see a man looked after the reservoir at Pedder Potts. I can picture now a large balding head, ruddy cheeks, a torn boiler suit, bloodstained from slaughtering lambs in the barn. Lived alone, made tea as he and Dad talked waterwork. The only furnishing, a horsehair couch, had spilt its guts on the earth floor. I sat warily, examined the room's strange decoration, walls covered in show rosettes, mostly firsts, prizes for his rough fells, he told me later, talking with quiet passion, a pin width, top line, muscling, that taught me something else, to see the man beyond appearances. Rough fells are a breed of sheep common in the fell country of northwest England. And I also need to thank my brother Ian, who remembers the name of this man. I have not used his name, but also mentioned the slaughtering lambs in the barn, which I didn't know about. So thanks for that, Ian. Right, where are we going next? I'm going to move to, way through the book, to a poem in memory of my mother, our mother, as there are three of us here. And it's also about Morecambe Bay, which the place I love now, but as a child, I thought amongst all the hill country that we loved, I thought Morecambe Bay was a kind of malevolent presence, really. In February 2004, our mother was living out the final weeks of her life in a care home in Morecambe. And one night, not 2 miles from where she was sleeping, that malevolence showed itself disastrously. So this poem connects my mother dying with the victims of that disaster. Morecambe Bay, 5th of February 2004, in memory of Mary Roberts. This floating world, realm of earth relinquished by land, dominion of the moonstruck sea, where evening's peach pinks and harebell blues fade to grey, a curtain drawn on the dying day. The tide slithers, creep races unheeded, slops into slacks, quickens sands, claims again yeoman's wharf, priest skier, mort bank. And you, a drowning linnet relinquished by life, adrift on a distillation of fear, memory, pretense, feel the tug of the ebb tide. But this night's tide comes not for you. 23 migrant workers slaving on Wharton sands to accrue 9p per pound of cockles, adrift the moment they left Fujian, have arrived at their final station. From this distance, it seems, your lives unfolded to common themes, poverty, powerlessness, separation. And even in the anguish of your dark night, you find compassion for these strangers, a final surge of the heart's tide. There is a question, still an uncertainty about how many people died that night. The official report says 21, but there are a number of authorities that say it was 23 or possibly even 24. So for the sake, for it's in the poem, I've gone with 23. Anyway, I think that's the end of my first section of reading. So I'm going to hand over to Janice, who will introduce my first guest reader. Feels really powerful saying that. My first guest reader. Over to Janice.
Thank you very much, Peter. Charlie Grace grew up in Baileystone, Glasgow. His poetry collections, Good Morning and Tales from the Dartry Mountains, were published respectively in 2010 and 2020 by Die Hard Press. His first novel, To Live With What You Are, was published in 2019 by Postbox Press. His poetry pamphlet, Belfast to Baileystone, is due to be published in 2022, this year, by Red Squirrel Press. His work has appeared in a range of anthologies and journals, with some listed for literary prizes, including the Bath Novel Award, Cambridge Short Story Prize, Fish Poetry Prize, and Bridport Short Story and Poetry Prizes. Charlie was the 2020 official screever for the Federation of Writers, Scotland, and is a former chair of the Scottish Writers' Centre. He now lives on the edge of the Trossachs. What a lovely place to live. Charlie, would you like to start reading for us, please? And the rest of us will mute.
Thank you very much, Janice, and thank you, Peter, for asking me along. I really enjoyed hearing you read out some of the poems that I've been enjoying reading in the book. It's really lovely. There's a lot of depth in there. Okay, so I'll read some poems from Tales from the Dartry Mountains, but I'm going to start off with a poem that I won't really introduce very much, except to say it was featured recently in the Poets Republic War and Peace project. No need to ask. No need to ask if they're just like us, the Ukrainians. They're the same for sure as the Iraqis crushed by the bombs of Blair and Bush. The same as the citizens of Leningrad freezing within the steel grip of Hitler. The same as the millions in Nazi camps and ghettos. They're just the same as Indians fleeing Amin for England's safety, as unarmed Catholics in Derry gunned down by British guns. They're the same as the lions led by donkeys to the mud of Bougainville, their mothers left to mourn their beautiful dead, the same as Russian mothers and Maori mothers and Uyghur mothers. Ukrainians dead are the same dead as Africans squeezed into hulls bound for plantations. All for the rand or the dollar or the ruble, and the hard-ons the men in charge will get. I'm going to stick with refugees, a poem from the Dartry Mountains book. I've been lucky enough to meet a number of asylum seekers and refugees in the last few years and learned a lot. Biscuit. I put my hand out to shake the hand of Lakia, the way I did with Hassan. She hands me a biscuit and smiles. It's not the culture, Hassan explains, for a woman to shake the hand of a man. And I think, fuck's sake, Lakia, get a grip. You're in a different place now, but it's okay to shake the hand of a man. And then I think about the kindness it was to offer me a biscuit to save my blushes, because I did not understand that it is not the culture for a man to expect to touch a hand of a woman he has only just met. I'll share a couple from the Dartry Mountains sequence. The most southerly Dartry mountain in the west of Ireland is Ben Bulben, which is known as Yates's Mountain. So it's a good poetic hill, and the Dartry mountain range goes north into County Leitrim and ends just before the border into County Fermanagh, which is the border to the United Kingdom and the border to the UK from the EU as well. My mother was born in among the Dartry Mountains at the north end. But this is on Ben Wiskin being the sister mountain to Ben Bulben, on Ben Wiskin. Rocks, grass, sphagnum, a drizzled scatter of crows in the multi-grey sky, black to grey black to all the softness of greys and the whitened edges of clouds. Sun wetly threatened in distant pale blue, the pink shell of a mountain snail, tiny white star of pearlwort. And this is jackdaws. I say to you, I know Chris Salt is here. I wrote this poem partly as a response to a Bashabe Fraser workshop at in the Bakehouse and Gatehouse of Fleet. So it makes that connection. That's the reason I'm connected to Annie and to Peter. So, and a lot of folk around here just now in this room. Jackdaws. It is this with jackdaws. They were squeezed into peat bogs, their beaks and bones and feathers and blood left to seep into the soft ground. They floated in the semi-hard earth, then eased their bodies into each another, until with the wood of the trees, the filaments of grasses, the crushed bodies of beasties and deer and people, they became the earth. Jackdaws' souls never leave their bodies. They ooze all their black godliness into their molecules and wait. When I burn turf, the essence of jackdaws smears the chimney walls, glistens blackly in the black soot. They rebirth from the embryonic dark, from the smear of soot, then clamber, clicking and glossy, into the late spring air. The smell of burning turf is the smell of a jackdaw's birth. And that's me. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very lovely reading. Thank you. Your first poem was so true. They're all the same. We're all the same. Thank you. And now we're going to hear again from Peter. Peter, are you ready for your second set? Looking forward to this.
I am. I think I'm unmuted. Yeah.
Yep.
Let me just say thank you, Charlie. I met Charlie for the first time at Big Lit Festival in Gatehouse last summer. And I instantly liked both you and your poems and feel honoured to have you here tonight. That's an opportunity, of course, Chris, to mention Big Lit, which is on the 21st to the 24th of July this year. Lots of readings, discussions and performances in the beautiful setting of Gatehouse of Fleet. There's another sequence of 4 poems. I think I must be channeling Edwin Morgan's fantastic Glasgow sonnets here, because I've got 3 sonnet sequences in the book. This sequence is called Isla Sketches, and it comes out of a campervan trip that Annie and I had on the island of Isla last summer. The sketches have got nothing to do with Isla. They're all about male behavior, which is something I'm increasingly interested in. And most of them are written at my expense, I've got to say. But so I'm just going to read the first one. All the sketches are named for a weather state or weather phase. The first one is just called Dry Spell. I think you'll understand why. He stopped by as we erected the tent with some comment about not fancying it in last night's wind. Then, ignoring you, told me he met his wife at university, stayed on to found his own company, found an old friend, now a lieutenant colonel, had come to buy his year's supply of malts, corrected the way I said Bruichladdich. Dismayed by the status signalling that passes for friendly overtures amongst men, I tried to stay out of the game, attuned to it like him, but to a lower rung. I'm done with knowing my place. I said, we must get on to get out in the sun. Today he grunted to my hi, didn't speak. Later we heard him screaming at his wife. Her reversing directions had left their van 4 inches from their awning tent. I enjoyed a moment of grim superiority. Still playing the status game after all. So now I want to talk about carpet bowls, as you do. This is very different to the indoor bowls you might see on the telly played in a big carpeted arena. I'm talking about the game that's played on narrow beds covered in baize that you find in village halls all over this part of Scotland. It's a very popular game here. And there used to actually be I don't know whether there still is, but I don't think so. There used to be an international tournament in Dumfries with teams coming from Canada and Australia all over to play carpet bowls. I was taken watching the curling at the Olympics this year. I did, sadly, watch the curling, and to notice that it's basically the same game. It uses the same terminology, and maybe you know, the two games have grown out the same geographical and cultural roots. But as well as the carpet beds you find in most village halls, and I'm going to try screen sharing here, there are halls specifically dedicated to carpet bowls in sort of often in remote spots, and this is one of them. As you can probably see, I don't think it's been used for a long time, but it's still got the beds, the carpet beds, the chairs, the dais and the scorer's dais and so on inside, and it's a powerfully evocative place. I just had to write about it. The snow-covered hills in the background are the wonderfully named rims of Kells, the eastern edge of the Galloway Hills. This is on the road between Moniaive and Carsfairn, about 8 miles out of Moniaive. Janice mentioned in the introduction my liking for Derek Mahon and his great poem, A Disused Shed in County Wexford, actually gave me a way into this, into writing about this place and about constructing a poem around the dimension of time. So let's go for it. If I can find the poem. I need to check what page we're on. Page 29, of course. This is the Bowls Hut at Strone Fregan. There are still places like this, where time reverses off a slow road and winds from the turbines on the hill and whatever future lies beyond to listen. Susurration of damp and mould lifting felt from beds, longing to be kissed again by Taylor Rolfe, Drake's Pride, Henselite. Trapped echoes, clack of lignum vitae, whispers between skip and hench of lambing, the hay, prospects for the Dumfries tournament. A shout of hog, their lead calling the head as their second kneels to the bed, delivers his bowl through the rusting guard to where the tea in its house holds its breath, yearning for the wood's slow, tender entry. The score framer clock stopped sometime around 1990. The chairs waiting for them to return from that night when they switched off the light, closed the door, calling over shoulders, "See you next week." "Aye, see you then." Only this time they didn't. And you with your digital camera and time to spare, contemplating the aesthetics of decay, the pleasing contrast of rust-red roof, once black walls, the deep blue, empathetic snow on the rims, linger at the broken window for a glimpse of a world unto itself, playing by its own rules, receding into the distance on a slow road. I'll just come back to you now and get rid of that. There we are. So that's Bowls Hut at Strone Fregan, and I'm trying to think where we go next. I know where we go next. When I put this collection together to send off to Janice at Dempsey and Windle, I thought, I think it's a poem short. It's just a bit thin. It needs another poem. I think that's going to be my new insult of choice. Is a poem short of a pamphlet. So I remembered that 2 or 3 months earlier, I'd seen a photograph in The Guardian. I'm not going to tell you what the photograph was of. You have to get it from the poem. And so I wrote this poem on a Saturday morning read it that night at the Bakehouse, at the open mic at the Bakehouse, at the Bakehouse Burns Night event. This was on the 29th of January. Sent the whole collection with the poem off to Janice on the Tuesday, and exactly 3 weeks later had the printer's proof back in my hand, the printer's proof of the whole collection. So I'm claiming for Janice and myself a world speed record from pen to printed page for this poem. It's called Revolution, 30th of January 1969, after a photograph by Ethan A. Russell. The camera seems to float above the city like some deity's eye, seeing this story play out to its ending, waiting for the legend to loosen from its rooftop scaffold and ascend into mythology, join company with the risen on their balustrade plinths across the street, Leonardo, Titian, Raphael, Wren drawing rock sketches of a London still recognizable, the skyline barely obtruded, Portland stone, yellow brick smoked to grey, hardly changed, perhaps like the lives of those who say they want a revolution, listening below, dark-suited office boys, shop girls, porters in uniform blue jackets, collar and tie, the revolution playing out over their heads. Even girlfriends and hangers-on huddled by the chimney pots are washed out, colourless. But Ringo's scarlet jacket is a struck match, fizzing sparks in 4/4 time across the roof, carrying the music over the edge, down to the crowd, the band's parting gift that, like them or not, would be a yardstick for this generation, measuring everything that was to come. Now, I showed that poem to a friend in Moniaive. I'm not going to say who, because there are people here who will know him. And it's not Graham Watson, okay? But someone who's very much into music. And he's a bit younger than me. And he said, well, I really like it, but what's it about? I said, well, it's about the Beatles rooftop concert. And he looked at me and he said, who are the Beatles? And I suddenly felt very, very old. Right, I think that's my second session done. So I'll hand back to Janice again for the second guest reader to be introduced. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, what ignorance there is about in the world. That was a great poem, I loved it. Yes, you caught me at a good moment. I wanted to get your pamphlet printed for March because I wanted to put it in as a to register with the Poetry Society book society list, and I just happened to have enough time to do it, and so we got it done, didn't we? Yes, great, thank you. And now we're going to hear from the other poet in the family, Annie Wright. Annie's third collection, Dangerous Pursuit of Yellow, was published by Smokestack Books in 2019. Annie is a member of Vain Women, and it's not spelt like that. Vain Women, the writing, performing, and publishing collective based in Darlington. She leads Moniaive Poetry Workshop in Southwest Scotland and runs the Lit Room Press. Recent work has appeared in Dreich and the Poet magazines, and online at Ink, Sweat and Tears and the Bakehouse. Disco Night South London 1977 was a winner in the Poetry Society members competition in December 2020, and Skunk Cabbage was commended in Second Light's competition in 2020. So, Annie Wright, we're looking forward to hearing your poems, please. Great, off you go.
I'm going to just read two poems tonight. The first is called Talisman, and it's one of a few poems I've been writing about Ukraine. And I've just heard that it's going to be published by Robin Barrett in his next The Poet magazine, which is Poems for Ukraine. Talisman. Left hand pressed to the window. His right holds a cell phone to his ear. He is speaking urgently. Someone is listening. A crowd presses round him to board the train. His hand doesn't move. Elegant fingers glued to glass. What he is saying is urgent. Not enough time to say all he wants. His hand pressed so firmly. When he lifts it, it appears he's left an imprint. But it's the hand of a boy, glued to glass. Behind him, a woman with a phone to her ear. The father, for he must be the father, turns his head, wipes his eyes, looks back at his son. This is the image the father will carry. This is the image the boy will never forget. His childhood flown. And the father walks away to do what must be done. And the second poem I'm going to read, I came across recently the story of this woman, and it's so amazing, I thought I had to turn it into a poem. She's called Winifred Maxwell and lived in the 1700s. And I think she was Scottish but educated in France. And I think the only other thing you need to know is a bit of Georgian slang. The term brisket beaters was Georgian slang for Roman Catholics. The Jailer's Tale. Sir, you looks like a fellow who likes his drink. Stand me a nappy ale, and I'll tell you a tale'll wet your whistle, of a fine lady who milked the pigeon, and her stiff-rumped hubby, both brisket beaters, him an earl and her a countess from the Scotty lands. To your good health, sir. William, the earl, sided with the old pretender fool in 1715, gets himself captured at Preston, brought to London and tried for treason. George, the old un, not our present king, has him taken to jail, and that's where I come in, turnkey at the Tower I was. I see you giving me the butchers, but it's true as I'm sat here on this stout bench. Where was I? Oh, our William was sentenced to be choked by a hempen quinsy, drawn and disembowelled, with his guts burned before his eyes, afore his nouse box is sliced off. His lordship was uppish, all his geese were swans, a grumpy guts, a coxcomb. He could manoeuvre the apostles. You wouldn't think he'd soon be kicking clouds at the hotel door, the way he prated on. Oh, I'd chirrup more with a pint of heavy wet. 1716 was a cruel winter, piss in the pot, frozen overnight, Wryneck Day set for the 24th. One morning of thick snow, commotion at the gates, a rum doxy, well rigged, and tongue enough for 2 sets of teeth, begs entry for her and her pretty maid. We gets them warm by the fire. She's all in silks and finery, a Frenchie by the sound of her. Her chatterers are going like the clappers, but it's sweet as honey, dripping in your lugs. Turns out she's his lordship's missus. We're bowing and scraping the knee, but she'll have none of it. Call me Winifred, please. They've ridden through ice and snowstorms from Galloway to London just to see his nibs and beg the king for mercy. She draws a purse from her cloak, tells my wife to buy hot food and bread for us all, bring it to the clink, and while she's at it, a jug or 2 of ale. Over the next week, she's in every day, dizzy with tales of how she's convinced George'll pardon her old man. We've heard it all before, but As it keeps 'em cheery and her purse coming out, we're happy to oblige. So now it's 23rd of Feb, and she sets her trap. Ooh, I've a spark in me throttle, a jug of rum 'ud settle. Winifred arrives that night with Cecilia, her maid, and 2 mopsy wives, Mrs. Mills and Mrs. Morgan. Well, she's high as a kite, all excited and giggly, gives me a purse of golden guineas and bottles of rum nance, so we can all toast the king who's agreed to a pardon. Well, I can only let in 2 at once, so in she goes with Mrs. Morgan. Or was it Mrs. Mills? I thought Mrs. Mills went in next, but I was groggified, and it was Mrs. Morgan who come out. I'm teasing Cecilia, who looks as fritted as a mouse, when Winifred calls her in. It's very dark by the time Cecilia comes out, with Mrs. Mills on her arm. Both hang their heads in sorrow. Winifred's talking loudly to her husband in the cell, trying to bolster the poor fella up. From his low voice, it seems convinced he's for the morning drop. When she comes out, she says he's at his prayers and doesn't want disturbing. So I lock his door. We've sucked the monkey and, drunk as lords, sleep soundly on the straw. Next morning, when the black coat comes to say the prayers and the gallows man is waiting, I unlock the door to find he's tipped us the Dublin packet. We were gulled, fleeced, kimbored, conned. It didn't take long to twig it was Winifred who schemed it. In the hoo-ha, I got my wife to gather all the guineas spilt on the floor, hide them in her smicket. I was lucky not to lose my head, though I lost me job when the fuss died down, and had a hefty fine, which Winifred's guineas paid. To her good health. She got him away across the herring pond to France. She's welcome to that grumble guts. She dressed as a woman and saved his life. The only successful escape ever from the Tower. One more for Lady Nithsdale, who outwitted a king none of us liked, who never learned a word of English and hated her all his days. And yes, I declare it, my humble part in the tale.
Well, that was quite a yarn, wasn't it? Fantastic. I think I saw the picture, but I don't think I read the article. It's amazing. Lovely poem. Great fun. Did you have to look up lots of Georgian slang for that?
Yes, I did. And actually, my lovely son had 3 years ago bought me a dictionary of Georgian slang for Christmas. So finally, I was able to.
Ideal. Yes, that was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Peter, can we hear from you? Your last set, please.
Yeah, just 2
Poems. Lovely.
finish the evening off. I'm unmuted, aren't I? Yes. First of all, though, let me just thank the guest readers, Charlie and Annie. Fantastic. Thank you both very much. I really appreciate it. And it's so nice to have you here, even though you're there. Well, Annie's here, but you're there, Charlie. Anyway, enough of that. And thank you as well to Janice for hosting the evening, for your introduction, but most of all, of course, for saying yes to publishing my book. Thank you very much. Another big thank. There's one more person I can't miss out, and that's Chris Salt, who just does a fantastic job keeping poetry live in this part of the world with the Bakehouse programme, the Big Lit Festival, and she's been an indomitable supporter of me in getting me to this point. So thanks for that, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, I wish I had a glass to raise to you as well. So 2 poems. The first is called Kites at Auchenfedric, and it's a shameless attempt to emulate Gerard Manley Hopkins' great poem, The Windhover, in its form and emotional response to watching kites. Auchenfedric is a small magical patch of moorland just up the hill from here where we live. It's a wonderful place. I love spending time there. And one morning on a very dreek day, I watched the kites circling around Auchenfedric, and they reminded me of Salvador Dali's painting, Christ of St. John of the Cross, that hangs in the Kelvin Grove Museum. Wonderful painting of a very modern looking contemporary Christ figure hanging from a cross high above a landscape that could be Galilee, could be Dali's home landscape of northeastern Spain. It could be Auchenfedric. It's a wonderful universal image. Dali described himself as an atomic artist. He was trying to paint images that would unify the world. I don't quite get that, but there are references in the poem to those points. So Kites at Auchenfedric, after Christ of St. John of the Cross, Salvador Dali. Red kites rattled by the in-by gate, drop from ash on the moor's edge, hook the liquid air and ascend to float on pinioned wings over this sodden northern Galilee. First one, then two and three, each a heart's leap lifting, exult ascending, until a circus of six circle the rim of land under the tented sky. I encircled, thought staunched, I entranced, mastery of wing plane dressing rough air, deft tail swivel holding a line, lines weaving a lucent roof over sanctified space. Each cruciform grace lifts the darkling veil, atoms of life unifying the universe, pinions combing infinity, rapt eyes fixated on the warrens of Auchenfedric. Louche brigands tumbling down the sky for joy, redeem my veiled heart, unkilted spirit. And finally, I'll finish with a poem dedicated to an old friend, Aki, Peter Atkinson, who throughout our teenage years into our early to mid 20s, we climbed hills together all over the north of England and Scotland. And it was a great partnership. We didn't say much to each other, but it was just like we were of one mind about everything when we were out on the hill. And then our lives went off in different directions. He now lives near Whitehaven on the close to the edge of the Lakeland Fells. And there's an important bit I missed out here that I really want to say just before I get there. When we were on Lakeland Hills, often you could see Criffel on the other side of the Solway, and it had a magnetic attraction because it was known as an extinct volcano. I mean, the whole of the Lake District is an extinct volcano, but never mind that. It was an extinct volcano, and it was in another country. And that was kind of magical to young lads, you know, who were looking across another country. And Criffel actually took us, we never went and climbed Criffel. I didn't do that until a few years ago, but it took us over the border and up into Scotland. He now lives, as I was saying, near Whitehaven, and I live beyond Criffel for Aki. I'm on the other side of Criffel now. At Glencaple's old tobacco quay, the moonstruck river flows backwards, a clock unwinding into memory. The tide spills away from Criffel's reel, upstream, threading this other country, where we climbed Clogher as child's play, became infected with longing for the high fells across the bay, followed them north to Grassmore, from where Criffel on a farther shore signalled where to go next. I think of Learga running the scree, our best, our final climb, the last day it was all aligned, the hill, you and me, our hill made mind. coming down fast in the sun's last rays. A fragile freedom, giving way to a life that led 50 years on, beyond Criffle to this riverside, looking back on those hills of youth across time's irreversible tide. That's an unashamedly sentimental end to the evening. I should have said Clogher, as my brothers will know, is the backdrop to our childhood. It's a hill east of Lancaster that just towered over where we grew up and was the first hill. Liaga, on paper it looks like Leotag, but I think Liaga is the correct pronunciation, is a beast of a mountain up in Torridon, absolutely amazing hill that we went up together. And that's me done. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you all for coming. I feel very supported and loved. Thank you.